Came to a realization the other day that I've been lying to you about historical fiction. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video in which I confess that I have not been honest with you, or probably with myself, about historical fiction. When people ask me, what my favorite genres to read are, I invariably say literary fiction, even though I hate that term, but that's the term that people use, nonfiction, and then probably mysteries. And I leave historical fiction out. And a couple things happened here recently that kind of brought this issue of historical fiction to my attention. One is I published a video about books that I admired but I didn't really like, and on that list I put Wolf Hall as a book that I admired for what it did, but I didn't really like reading it, or I didn't really enjoy it. And Hannah from Hannah's Books asked me why, and it really took me a while to come up with an explanation for why I didn't like Wolf Hall, which I'll go into here in a little bit later. But that got me thinking about historical fiction and what I do and don't like. And then I saw that Katie over at Books and Things had made a video last week sometimes, I think, in which she was talking about the prize list for the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. And in the course of talking about that prize, she mentioned that books that were set or dealt with subjects that were 60 years prior to the time of writing were eligible. And that really made me think about historical fiction in a different way, in a way I probably should have been thinking about it before, because, thinking about that 60-year time period, and then having thought through, my own ideas about why I didn't enjoy Wolf Hall, kind of led me to an understanding that what I've been saying about historical fiction is really based on just a couple of books and doesn't reflect what's really true. If what counts as historical fiction is just any book set in a time period 60 years before the author read it, then one of my favorite books and one of the greatest American novels of all time, Beloved, counts as historical fiction, and I certainly love that book. The same thing would be true for some of the works of William Faulkner, like The Unvanquished, which is set during the Civil War, which I really enjoyed that book. So keeping that 60-year time period in mind, then I thought, wow, there are actually a lot of books which, I probably classify as literary fiction, again, even though I don't really care for that term, but which are actually also historical fiction. So, in that regard, I need to stop talking about not liking historical fiction, or talking about, or maybe listing historical fiction as one of my favorite genres. And then I started thinking harder about what I've been what I've read in terms of historical fiction, using that new guideline, and I realized a lot of the books that I oftentimes mention as my favorite books, or some of my books of the year, are historical fiction. For instance, At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop, which is set during World War I, and was written in 2022, I believe, is historical fiction. Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, which is set in the antebellum South in Maryland in the 1800s, before the Civil War, is a work of speculative fiction or science fiction. It is also a work of historical fiction in which the main character travels back in time to that time period. And then I realized how hypocritical I've been being about this whole historical fiction thing, because I remembered that I've read 21 works of historical fiction by the exact same author. That's Patrick O'Brian, because I've read all of the books in the Aubrey Maturin series of books, which began with the book Master and Commander, which in part was made into a movie, and I love those books. And then I thought, Katie Lumsden came out with a work of historical fiction that I liked a great deal in the last year, The Secrets of Hartwood Hall, and I like that book, and that's clearly historical fiction. And then I thought, well, Hamnet is a book. Hamnet by Maggie is a book that I really liked and found to be emotionally powerful, and that is a work of historical fiction. So what is it that I don't like about some works of historical fiction that have led me to believe or act like historical fiction isn't one of my favorite genres? So there are two works of historical fiction I think are probably responsible for my denial that I like historical fiction. One is Gone with the Wind, which is a work of historical fiction which I dislike because, it's inaccurate in terms of its representation of the historical South and Reconstruction and the role of the Klan and the lives and goals of freed black people after the Civil War. It's an inaccurate depiction of that, which I think has gone a long way towards giving us a distorted picture of the South in the lead up to and after the Civil War, and on top of that, it's openly racist. So that's a pretty obvious reason why I don't like Gone with the Wind, and maybe I'm holding that against historical fiction because I want it to be accurate. But I don't necessarily think that's the whole problem. And so then I told you I talked about or thought about Wolf Hall, and I think what it is about Wolf Hall that I didn't enjoy was that it provided a great deal of detailed information and kind of fictional ideas about motivations and actions of very real people, of actual historical figures, Cromwell, Henry VIII, the Boleyn sisters, etc., about actual historical figures about which we know a fair amount. And what bothered me about that, I think, and one of the things that I found to be kind of unsettling about that, in addition to just the massive amount of detail and the way in which I thought some things were represented or tweaked for dramatic effect, is the idea that more people are probably going to read Wolf Hall, have probably already read Wolf Hall, than will read any actual work of history about Cromwell or King Henry VIII or the Boleyns, and their ideas about them are going to be shaped by this work of historical fiction. Now, I told you I admired Wolf Hall. I respect Mantel's writing, number one, but also her research, and I believe that she was going based off of good historical research, which is still that idea for me that the book, I think, kind of crosses the line in some way between a work of history and a work of fiction in a way that makes me, as maybe somebody who's too pretentious about the study of history, makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So if I don't like those two books, or if I don't like Wolf Hall, why do I like the other books? And I have some thoughts about that. First of all, if you look at the books I listed, Beloved, Faulkner's Book of the Unvanquished, At Night All Blood is Black, Kindred, Master and Commander, involve books that are set in a real historical time period and may even involve real historical events, but the people involved are not real people. They're not real historical figures. They're fictional characters operating set in a historical time period. I think I'm a lot more comfortable with that. And so if you notice in all those, like in Kay's book, The Secrets of Hartwood Hall, it really is clearly set in the Victorian period, and it kind of is calling to mind and intentionally kind of making call-outs to important works of Victorian literature, but the characters themselves are fictional, and the events that take place are fictional. And I think I definitely am more comfortable with that. I think I definitely like that. The same thing is true with Diop's book, At Night All Blood is Black, which is set in the trenches during World War I among a group of Senegalese soldiers who are fighting alongside the French in the trenches in World War I. And while that's absolutely true, the characters themselves are fictional. And then, that then brought me up against Hamnet, which, if you've read Hamnet by Maggie, involves Shakespeare and Shakespeare's family. And those are definitely real historical figures. But in that case, so little is known about Shakespeare, much less about his kids and his wife, that I don't really see Zelda. I don't really see the same harm in that in fictionalizing their lives as I apparently do in the fictionalization of the lives of the characters in Wolf Hall. Anyway, because of all that, I think I've been lying about whether or not I like historical fiction. So I thought I'd make this video and talk about it. Really love to see your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.